welcome to the 5V podcast. Today I'm joined by Vicky Bunyard. Vicky is the CTO for IBM Technology, Northern Europe. Vicky, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very, very good to be here.
You're very welcome. Appreciate it. Vicky, so IBM, massive company, been around for a very, very long time. A lot of people know of IBM. I'd be curious to kick off just a little bit about your background and experience at IBM and how you got to this position.
Yeah, and it's a long story. It feels like it's been a long time. But, I started out as a teeny tiny engineer in the UK, working in the defence industry and in fact, working on sonar systems, which is really exciting stuff and very big projects and quite complex projects. And the interesting thing with that was, I started out designing and what you started to realize when you're working in design is you hit all kinds of problems and you start to look at these problems and you start to think, okay, so why am I hitting these problems? And what you realize is, well, the problems aren't actually in the design. It's a step back in what we were asked for. What did you ask us for? What was the question? And so what happened was I kind of, through the course of my career, kept kind of taking a step back and going, okay, but the problem that I'm trying to solve is not here. It's outside this space that I'm looking at. So I kind of kept taking a step back and taking a step up and got further and further to thinking about, okay, so what is your strategy for doing design, and what is your strategy for technology, and how are you thinking about, okay, I want to design this thing over here, but where did that start from? What was the original ask? And as I was doing that, I got pulled into more consultancy roles because I started to think about that and started to think about, okay, what are the right methods for doing this more effectively? How do I make sure that I don't see problems in my design because I've done something upstream that means that the answer that I'm giving is not the right answer to the question that I was asked. And so I kind of went from engineering into consultancy, and what you saw at that time was an increase in software coming into systems. So where before I was more looking at big, heavy industrial systems, I was getting more and more onto the software side and trying to understand, okay, same question, same problem, but for software, why is this not quite working the way that we expect? Did we ask the question in the right way? Are we actually designing for the problem that we're trying to solve? And as I was going through that process, what I started to get into was more and more around, okay, well, how do I use technology to help me think about technology and help me do the design of the technology and be more effective in what I'm trying to do? And so that brought me more and more into the kind of the technology organizations and looking at how do I implement technology. And as part of that, I did much more learning around enterprise architecture, because you also see the rise in IT systems and you see the importance of IT systems. And so I started to look more and more about enterprise architecture and taking the same thinking around the big, heavy industrial systems to how do we apply those to the IT systems so they're effective and they are integrated and they are answering the problem that we're trying to solve. And so that gives you you get a very good view on strategy, and you get a very good view on technology landscapes and how technology landscapes fit together. And I think that's a little bit where I kind of end up in IBM. And I ended up in IBM via an acquisition of a small company that I was working for. And this was quite an interesting experience because I came from a very small company into a very big company. But I kind of came in and I looked around and I got very excited because I had every single possible type of technology that I could ever want in my big box of bits. And
is that quite daunting sometimes as well, to have access to everything as opposed to being focused in one particular area?
I love it. I mean, I absolutely love it and I think, I've talked a little bit about, okay, I keep backing up to say, tell me what the problem is, because if I understand the problem, I can really understand what the right way to solve this is. And the bigger my box of technologies, the more capabilities I've got, the more chance I've got of actually solving the problem that I'm trying to solve. And so for me personally, I find that absolutely fantastic, and it's really fundamental that everything that drives me. And I think you have technical people who are very, very deep and very, very focused and very, very, and have this really very deep understanding of a particular part of technology, and that's fantastic, and we need those people. And you also have the kind of people who are, okay, I can see this huge picture, and I can see how it all fits together, and we need those people. And really important in there is, and for me, technology is a team sport. So when we put those combinations of people together, oh my goodness, the things we can do are incredible, and the things that we have done are incredible. So
Yeah.
I love it. No, I look at it and go, oh, more, give me more.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So that I guess that was your kind of foray into IBM through acquisition, being part of a larger organization, rose through the ranks within that business, up to the position you are now for CTO of Technology Northern. One of the things that is so paramount to 5E podcast as the wider group, 5E Media, and of course 5 Values, the overarching business, is sustainability and using tech for a force for good. In fact, sustainability is one of our founding 5 values, right? And I know this resonates with you, and I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit. I mean, what does sustainability, when it comes to tech, what does that mean to you, Vicky?
Yeah, and I mean, this is always the $1 million question, isn't it? And I think this is an interesting one, because it means different things to everybody, for sure. And this I think starts to be part of the reason why we struggle with it a little bit. And I think really what it means to me is thinking about, we have finite resources, we have finite skills, in fact. So the number of experts, or the amount of expertise that's out there and skill that's out there that's able to do certain things is limited. We have this extraordinary planet that we live on, which is just breathtaking and quite exciting in what's out there and what's available and what's possible. But there is no planet B, and we have to look after it, and we have to think about, okay, what is the impact of what we do? And so to me, this kind of sustainability piece has to translate into what is the impact of what we do, and how do we ensure that the impact of what we do is not damaging. And I think this always in my head a little bit is, I always like to draw a parallel a little bit with the medical industries and medicine. You had the Hippocratic Oath from kind of 400 BC, which is first do no harm. And for me, I think there's a piece of this where it's as simple as thinking about what we do, and first of all trying to do no harm. But then it becomes much, much bigger, and I think it becomes about really thinking about, okay, what resources do we really have, and how do we use those in the way that's most effective, and how do we make sure that we are just not using more than we need to because they're limited, and how do we make sure that we are, if we are using them, how are we recycling them, and how are we bringing them back into service? Because one of the big things I always have in the back of my head with technology is, I mean, if you just look at the last 100 years and just the acceleration and the sheer change in our lives that has happened because of technology, and I would say, how much better our lives are really as as a byproduct of this acceleration of technology. But the flip side in my head is always, yeah, okay, but we create more technology, and that consumes more resources, and some of those resources are very rare, and some of them are very dangerous, in fact. And to just use those resources, build new technology, discard those resources, we can't do that. We have to understand, how do we get this? And people are talking a lot around circular economy. How do we use and reuse these resources effectively so that we don't have to keep pulling on finite resources? And how do we do that in a way that is clean and does no harm? And I think, so for me, there's always a kind of thing in the back of my head, which is, okay, there's the whole range of sustainability. So, look after our resources, make sure that we're not doing damage. But there's always a piece of this which comes back to do no harm, and really think about what is the impact of what you're doing. What's the impact on the environment? What's the impact on people? What's the impact on whatever it is?
Yeah, and I think that mentality of do no harm, I think, is a really poignant one, right? So what is the benefit of what we're developing? What problem does it solve? And are we sure it isn't creating another problem?
Yeah.
Right. And I think, if you can have those three ratchets when you're going out there to do anything, that's a really, really important one. And I think, there's so many, use cases and so many scenarios in which we have done some great things. And we talk about IoT. We talk about IoT a lot in the past, and that tackles a lot of challenges, a lot of issues. But what is the outcome from that? What is the long-term effects of that? And for instance, in the case of solar panels, right, and solar power, that has its pros and its cons, right, and it's how we manage that, and it's how we seek to make that more sustainable in the future, especially when it comes to recycling of solar panels. I wanted to talk about the Mayflower, if I could. So the Mayflower is obviously very well known amongst IBM circles. For people that don't know, could you explain what the Mayflower is and what your involvement was with the Mayflower as well?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the key with this, and obviously this comes back to the sustainability question, but I kind of have to back up a little bit and tell you the whole story, because I think the whole story is really relevant when you start to think about your values. And so obviously 2020, and I'm just checking in my brain whether that's the right year, actually. But
I always forget 2 years through the pandemic. It just,
like the press or
it just never really happened, right?
So, you had the Mayflower that sailed from Plymouth in the UK to Plymouth in the USA 400 years ago, carrying the pilgrims, and okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the back of that, but always when these anniversaries come up, somebody somewhere wants to know, okay, how are we going to celebrate this 400th anniversary? And quite often, particularly with ships, somebody says, "Oh, let's recreate the ship." Yeah, so that kind of happens quite a lot. And in fact, in these discussions, there was a gentleman called Brett Fanoof, who is part of ProMare, and he kind of stepped up and said, "Well, look, we did that 400 years ago. We know how to do ships." But maybe what we should be thinking about is, what's the Mayflower for the next 400 years? And so when you start to think about this, and why I think the whole story becomes important is because we were talking a little bit about really thinking about the impact of something that you do, and really thinking about what's the benefit and why do it. And so he was thinking, so what should the Mayflower look like for the next 400 years? And the original was built to solve a problem. Yeah. And okay, the perceived problem at the time. So what is the big problem that we're facing right now? And it is climate change. And obviously that has knock on sustainability but it's climate change. That's the big thing. And one of the big issues around climate change is we don't have the data to be able to really build the models to understand things enough to know what is the right, exactly to your point, if I push over here, what's affected over here? So if I try and make an adjustment, what's the impact of that adjustment? So his thinking was then, well, look, you have this huge ocean, or these huge oceans that are the engine room for the planet, and they are the engine room for climate. And so if we can't understand the ocean, we're kind of going to struggle a little bit with understanding climate and climate change. So his thinking was, okay, the Mayflower for the next 400 years should be about trying to get more data about the ocean and trying to get that information that we desperately need to be able to do the right modeling and then really understand when I pull this is what moves. And so I shouldn't pull that. I should go over here and turn this instead. And so this was the original thinking. And so IBM then got involved in that, because if you're going to do this, one, you're going to have to deal with a massive amount of data for sure. Two, you've got an edge system, which really is somewhere right out in the ocean, may or may not have any kind of communication. And three is let me say that slightly differently. And three, you're going to want to jam full of as many instruments and measurements and sensors and whatever you can to gather as much data as you possibly can as fast as you can. And so that's where we got involved a little bit. And as part of that conversation, the thinking was, well, look, if you want to jam this full of technology, having people on board, they take up a lot of space. They need food and bathrooms, and occasionally they are expecting to go home and see their families. And that's kind of not in line with, I need as much data as I can possibly get out of this huge ocean. And of course, being in the middle of the ocean is relatively dangerous. So how do we do this? And I think what they then came up with is, okay, can we get to a fully autonomous vessel, which is jammed with all of the technology, jammed with all of the sensors, has all of the storage and all of the processing capability that it needs, so that it can fully autonomously make its own decisions out on the ocean? And so the team worked on it, and so this was a consortium of Promare with IBM, with a whole bunch of organizations. And when you start to look into the experimentation, there are a lot of universities involved there. University of Liverpool, for example, which is my old university. So there's a big consortium that worked on this. But the thing for us that was really exciting was all of the AI around making this ship autonomous. So training it to understand, what are the regulations that you need to follow? What do you do if you're out on the water and you see shipping containers? If there are shipping containers and other vessels and whales, what do you do? How do you act? So fully autonomous vessel. She sailed from Plymouth in the UK to Plymouth in the USA first half of this year. So you can go find the details on mass400.com. And you can see the making of, you can see the journey from Plymouth to Plymouth. But this is fantastic for me, and from the perspective of Tech for Good, because this is really saying, okay, how can we do good here? Well, we can do good by really learning as much as we can about the oceans and use all of that data to be able to make good decisions and to really think about good decisions. But then from our perspective, what becomes really exciting is it gives us the opportunity to test the automation and the autonomy really seriously, It gives us the opportunity to test the AI and the ability for autonomy. And it really gives us a different view on how do you apply technology in these most complex environments to do these most complex things. So that's hugely powerful. And I think there were a few things that happened in there that were fabulous. Because if at one point, she's going across the ocean and all of a sudden she stops and she backs up and she goes and takes herself off to the Azores. And a few people were saying to me, "Oh no, it's all gone wrong." It's like, no. She's done exactly what she was supposed to do. She's detected she's got a problem and she's gone somewhere to fix the problem. This is perfect. This is perfect behavior from the system. So, hugely powerful project. And I think, they're pulling down all the data now, and the intention is that all of that data will be available and open, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And I think that this is kind of the MVP, the prototype. You can see the natural progression of that, which is a fleet of these little things roaming the ocean, gathering data, bringing all of that data back. And to the point on sustainability, the kind of experiments they've got on board are things like a technical tongue for tasting the water to see what's the chemical composition of the water, and detectors that are looking for microplastics in the water. So starting to really get an assessment of what microplastics are out there on the ocean, and how serious is that problem, and where are the kind of hot spots, and a whole bunch of things around temperature and salinity and all of those good readings that you can get from the ocean. But there's another one in there that I think is so interesting. So they have an experiment on board which is detecting whale song, and so really looking at whales. And this becomes really interesting because there's a piece of this where it's like, well, whales are really good and we want to protect the whales. But there's a little wrinkle in here which a lot of people don't think about, and I don't know if do you know what that is about whales and the impact of whales on sustainability?
No.
It's fabulous. There's recent research which is really pointing to the fact that whales are massive carbon sinks.
Right.
So the more whales you have in the ocean, the less carbon you have in the atmosphere. So if you can start to look at this and look at whale migration patterns and maybe divert shipping so it's not affecting whale migration and impacting whale populations, and start to grow whale populations again, you have a direct impact on carbon in the atmosphere.
Wow.
How cool is that?
That's really cool. Yeah. That's incredible though, right? But I think that's also an outcome of being involved in this project with was it Promare, the business that you're involved with?
Promare, yeah.
Promare, yeah. So I think being part of that, and the website for people that want to go and look at this again. So it's nas400.com. I had a quick look earlier today, and it's you can track it, can't you? You can track the journey. You can see lots of updates on various social media and on LinkedIn, etc. But I think in terms of the MVP that you talk about, being able to harvest information from the seas to better understand our planet is so paramount, because for years people have said that we know more about space than we do our own seas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always and like I say, it's so essential. And this kind of direct link between whales and carbon, I mean, that's slightly mind-blowing.
It is.
But this, I think, comes back to something that I think becomes really important, because this is a really interesting conceptual exercise, because it's kind of, would anybody, until the research emerged, how many people would really have thought, okay, maybe the solution to our carbon problem is more whales? This connection, is not something that you would necessarily think of, and for me, that starts to come back to this idea of, do you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve? do you really know what is the problem you're trying to solve, and how is technology part of that solution, and how do you fit those things together?
I personally feel, for me, I think having a focus on this and being able to understand it is the primary concern, and I wonder whether or not all businesses have that kind of purpose-led approach, because some of the things that you've spoken about here, and you've made a quote, and I'll read the quote for the benefit of the viewers and listeners. It is not about how great the tech is, but also how great we can be when we are backed by great tech, and the technology can be the answer, but only if we truly understand the question. And I think that's really poignant here as well, because what is the MVP, right? What is the mission, the vision, and the purpose behind what we're trying to do? And I think that you can address that quite nicely, actually, it seems, and kind of, understand the question in order to derive the right answer. And clearly this is something that you're quite passionate about, and the Mayflower's been quite well heralded in the press, and there's been a lot of news and a lot of information about that. Other things on the horizon within IBM, other projects that you're working on in a similar vein to this, other things in the pipeline?
There are so many going on, and the trouble is, I've kind of gone, ooh, what can I talk about?
Yeah, of course, that you can talk about at least. Yeah.
But I think that so I kind of back up a little bit and think about the reality. Let's take sustainability, for example, or climate change, or all of those pieces. There are some fundamentals in there that we're working on really hard, and regardless of the specific projects, they go across multiple projects and globally. But the kind of fundamentals in there are really around, if you don't have good data, you are really going to struggle to understand what the problem looks like. Yeah, and so one of the big things that is we're working on in a number of places is, how do we get to that data? And so this kind of ESG data, better and better ways of getting to that ESG data. How can I access it? And I mean, to your point earlier about, and I think much earlier about sensors, how can we censor? How can we get sensors out there, and how can we get the data back? How can we really use the kind of edge capabilities and think really about, how do I get as much data as I possibly can? How do I get that to a place where I can really process it effectively? So how do I make sure that I can get the storage in the right place? Because quite frankly, there's just a big, if I've just got a big load of data, where I'm going to put it, and then really thinking about the analytics around that, and the different projects that we have going on around, okay, well, great, now I've got a dirty, great big box of data, and what am I going to do with it? And then how do I extend all of that with AI to make sure, because it is big and it is non-obvious. And I think that's something that we have to think about, is how do I use AI to really get to understand, okay, what is going on? What am I really seeing? How do I ask the question effectively? Because I think, to me, the big thing with understanding the problem is always, and ask another question, and peel it back, and ask another question, and ask a different question, and ask a different question from a different perspective. And with this kind of scope and scale of data, you need the AI to be able to do that, because it gets big. So I think I would say that's a little bit where our focus is we're running projects across the globe really at the moment, but the focus is, first, how do I get to the data? How do I get that data in a place where I can really do the analysis? How do I apply the analytics? How do I extend that with AI so that I can really understand, what is this data telling me? And then all of the infrastructure under that, how do I hook all of that together so that it's effective? And for sure, for us right now, a huge part of that, I talked about Promare and the big consortium that was working on that. That for us right now is it's not just about us. Let's put it that way. So our approach to all of this right now is, and who else? What other technology companies? What other organizations? Who else is in that ecosystem, and who else can feed data or feed systems or feed innovation into that? How do we hook all of this together so that we can get to that, what really is the problem, and then think about, okay, what really is the answer?
Mm, mm. No, I agree. I think that's a great strap line for this episode as well. Actually, it's not just about us,
Yeah.
right? Which I think is really, really important. We've spoken a lot in the past, certainly on the show, around data, the importance of collecting the right data, timely, using it for the right purposes, and also the interpretation of. And I think, there's been a sea change really in the requirements around data science and the use of big data, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, and people taking it a lot more seriously and going back from a sensor point of view, harvesting multiple points, to be able to derive an answer to a question that you might have about, where do we particularly head, is really important. I think also from a linking this back to some of the values that we hold as a business, but also that you hold individually, and obviously on behalf of IBM, it's a security and the authenticity behind that as well, right? Because I think sometimes, with the wrong use of this data, it can lead to disastrous events, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, and for sure. And I mean, I think this is something which I can't overemphasize how seriously we take that. And I think, we have an entire practice dedicated to ethics and AI. And one of my colleagues here in Amsterdam, she is one of our newly minted distinguished engineers in that space. So her focus really is on how are we using data, and how are we using that in combination with AI in a way that's ethical? How do we think about that? How do we think about our policies? How do we support our clients thinking about their policies? Sorry, and how do we get them asking the right questions around? Okay, I can go do this. I've got all this data. I could go do all these things. I could plug in all these systems, but should I? And if I do, am I really am I doing something that is going to lead to pain? And I'm going to cough 1 second. I'm really sorry. And backing up a little bit. So, because, for sure, when you start to look at banks or insurance companies or anyone that's holding personal information or just any information about people, you've immediately got an ethical question to answer. And for sure, regulation is coming through thick and fast that helps to support that and helps to make sure that our data is protected and it's used in a way that's effective. But I think, and I'm sure you've probably talked about this in your podcast in the past, is once you start to play with AI, you immediately start to get some bias in your systems, and as soon as you've got bias in your systems, you are at risk of the answer to the question that's thrown out being something which potentially harms somebody, and not necessarily through any, not by any conscious decision making, but just because you've thought about it from this perspective and it looks fine from this perspective, but you haven't thought about it from this perspective, and from this perspective it's damaging. And so this whole practice that we have around how are we ethical about our data, and how are we ethical about our AI, and how can we support our clients to think about that and understand that, and use the technology to make sure that they are not introducing unconscious bias, and not introducing things which are potentially damaging. So that is hugely important to us right now, and I think it should be hugely important. I mean, for sure, it is globally hugely important, but I think it also should be something which we as any kind of provider, so whether we're a technology provider or a bank or an insurance company or, I think we have to have this kind of muscle in our brains, which is, and have you thought about the ethics of this? And
Yeah.
have you thought about the impact? If you do this and this is the answer, what is that going to do for this portion of the population?
Yeah, and do you know what? Like, I'm totally with you on this, right? I really believe in it. I really believe that we all have to do something together, right? And there's lots of opinions on this around, have we gone too far when it comes to climate change already, so on and so forth. But if we can't just not do any from a wider context, what do you think are the barriers to big business, right, and to people actually asking those questions? Is it all just around instant profit for businesses? Do you think this is why they don't answer these questions, or being able to have people think about the outcome of those actions? What kind of mindset shifts do we need to make for people to actually realize that they need to do this, right?
Yeah, and I do think this is a tricky one, and I think this is always a tricky one because and I mean, my experience, your experience of most organizations is they are trying to do the right thing in the right way. Okay, you get the occasional exception, but most are trying to do the right thing in the right way. And I think one of the issues for sure is it feels big and complex, and working out where to start is the hardest thing. And I mean, we all know that. We know that from our own, from an organizational perspective, but from our own personal experience, the hardest thing to do when you do anything is start. And so there's a piece of this, I think, which is there is so much that you could do and should do, but so where do I start? What's the first step? And then I think coming all the way back to the start of this conversation, okay, let's say we want to do something with sustainability. Well, okay, but what do you mean by sustainability? Yeah, because for you, for your organization, for organization A, it might mean one thing, and for organization B, it might mean something else. And I think to your question, I think the single most important thing is to start, and it's just to pick a thread, pick a thread and start. And for sure, if you're doing a massive amount of data processing and AI and analytics with data that is potentially personal, maybe you should start with AI and ethics. So it's find those threads, and you put together those strategic goals, but make them real and make them executable within your organization, and not look at the whole thing and kind of get that analysis paralysis piece where it looks huge and I don't know where to start. Just start is the first.
Yeah.
And talk to the experts. We have experts. There are experts all over the place who can help, but find that. How do I start?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, right? Identification that this is something that you need to do, and finding a start, because it may not be much, but at least it's something, and the start can often dictate other aspects, right? Here in the UK, for our UK listeners and viewers, we have people lobbying against the Better Business Act at the moment, right? To produce an impact report that actually what your company does alongside just your standard profit and loss and general accounts. And I think that that's important. And I think that, I think moving forward that there is a duty of care that a business has and how it interacts. And I think there is a general wave of consciousness around this, it seems, and rightly so. Maybe it's taken more time to get there, but equally, at least we are here now, right? And so even even if there's been a couple of kind of people that have not seen the benefits of it, then really it's down to us to show and highlight this, and this is what we hope to do in this podcast. and equally with some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's key. I think one of the things is just keep asking the question.
Mm,
Just ask the question and ask the question and ask the question. And I think, find the thread and keep banging the drum. And yeah, it's not magic, it's work. And I think that's also a piece of it, which is it is work. And we kind of have to do the work. But that's also the fun bit.
yeah, yeah. But it is what you make it, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you've obviously spoken at events when we were off screen earlier before the podcast. You're talking about the Women in Technology event you did in Amsterdam recently, and it's lovely to see someone so passionate about this. I mean, how can we help drive this innovation forward, right? What can that look like in terms of diversity representation as well, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that's a big topic and something that the technology industry has suffered with in the past, right?
Hmm.
What do you think are some steps that companies could make, and given the steps that IBM have made and your personal journey to help balance this?
Yeah, and I think there are a few things in there, one thing, and I know it's one of your values, is inclusivity.
Mm,
And I think one of our big passions is it's fine if you build a diverse team, but if you're not then inclusive, you haven't changed anything. In fact, and why I think that's so important is because I've talked a lot about you can only kind of get to the right solution if you ask the questions and you keep asking the questions and you keep looking from different perspectives. And so diversity in teams is essential to that, because what you really want to drive good innovation is someone who kind of sits there and goes, yeah, but did you think of this? Did you even think, did you think of this at all? Um, because they have a different experience and a different view, and so they do see the world differently. And so there's kind of the fundamental, which is I firmly believe that you don't get to good solutions if you don't have that diversity in teams. Or you might get to a good solution, but it's going to be a good solution for a small percentage of the population. And exactly as we talked about before, it might be a good solution over here, but what's the effect over here? I don't know. So you have to have that diversity of teams, but you have to foster that inclusivity, because you have to have the ability or the opening for the new graduate who's never worked before and is half the age of everybody else in the room and doesn't
mm,
have the confidence and doesn't have the experience to be able to say, but what about this thing? Yeah, and to have the space to make the comment and ask the question. So that for us is huge. Is okay. Diversity is nice, but without inclusivity, you've not gained anything. And then I think, I mean, to me, and I'll back away from that statement and start from a different position. When I started in engineering, I was one of two women who graduated in a class of 100 people.
wow.
So yeah, so my whole engineering career has been me in a room with a whole bunch of guys, and um, and I've had some quite interesting experiences with that. But also, I've had a lot of people who were allies and who have given me the scope to speak up and have supported me if things have gone in, perhaps not gone in quite the right direction, who have helped me. And so I think there is a big piece of this about allyship, which is part of inclusivity and really important. But I also think, and a very personal observation is, we still haven't quite worked out how to encourage girls to get more into technology. And I think, you know, there's always going to be an issue if we can't get girls excited about this. They don't go to university and do technical qualifications, and therefore they never get into technology roles. And this to me is such a waste of talent. But it's also um, it's disadvantaging huge portions of the population who could have really good careers and do the most amazing things, who kind of never get that opportunity to do it, and that to me is a shame. So I think we still have to be working on how do we make sure that girls in schools are not put off being good at maths and getting into technology and going and doing STEM and going and doing exciting things with tech.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's hopefully something that we can help do within this podcast. Something that you are passionate about in events that you've spoken about. But I think also, when I've spoken about this in the past, I think it really goes back to probably back, I would say, actually, to kind of A levels, right? So I remember when I was at school, and you had classes around and discussions around what you might study at university, or if university was right for you, right? But it rather than the kind of classics, kind of talking about technology and so on. And I think to a degree, because technology has become so much more centric to our lives, I think it's probably helped in some respect, actually open people's eyes to that. But I know there's been certain initiatives out there. Cody Kloss, for instance, Code with Cody, she's done very well. Famous US figure, and got people, young girls into coding, etc. So I think there are things out there that have started to gain traction. But I think also, again, I'm going to be quite fairly abstract with my comment here, but I think when technology evolves, so you have the ability to code in more no-code ways, and so the barriers to entry become less prevalent, then I think you'll see a bigger influx. Because I think if you think about it from a simplistic sense, I studied embedded engineering. You did an engineering degree. You have to have a certain mindset to understand that, right? And you also have to get past certain, complex and technical challenges. So I think when technology can evolve in itself so that people can program in a way which they don't have to learn the syntax of very complicated languages as well, which I think we are kind of on route to in some degree. I think that would also help somewhat as well, right? But in general, not just women, but I think more people into the industry. Because when we started this podcast, you spoke about obviously nurturing talent and the lack of talent that we would have, right? And I think that perhaps would help, right? And maybe that's just my view on it.
Well, and I think, you hit an important point, because there is a tendency for everybody to, there's always a diversity discussion, and it tends to be about men and women, and that's not diversity, that's binary. Diversity's really got to be actually diverse, and so exactly as you said, we have a skills gap, and actually we just need more people in technology. And I think there is a piece of it which is still the old kind of, engineering is this or that or the other. And the thing that I try to talk about is, and going back to this acceleration that's gone over the last 100 years, but if you look at the acceleration in technology in the last 2 years with COVID, and how digitization has run rampant. And there are different measures out there, but it's kind of, some of them are kind of 6, 7 or 8 years of progression made within 2 years. And if you look at the fact now, or if you look at that period, and where children were going to school via, WebEx or some kind of platform, and people were doing their shopping via their apps, and really having to use technology personally at home in a way that probably you and I would have done, but not my grandmother or everybody's children. That technology would not have been embedded in their lives in that way. And I'm slightly hoping that what that does is brings home, and I think this is an important thing, that when we work in the industry, we understand technology touches all of our lives all of the time. I heard a statistic. I've no idea if you have an idea of how many times you touch an IBM system in a day. Any idea? It's like
50.
Yeah, I mean, average person every single day on the planet touches one of our systems 30 times a day.
Wow.
You have no idea. You've no clue when you're booking air tickets or using your credit card, or there's a whole bunch of things where you're touching one of our systems. And that level of technology embedded in your life, it's so important that everybody in society is represented in shaping that technology and shaping what that world looks like. I'm really hoping that this shortened period where people are much more aware of technology and much more involved in technology is going to drive more people to understand this is shaping our world. And actually, it's not about whether I want to be an engineer or not. It's about that I want to be a full partner in shaping the world and shaping the future of our world.
Wow. You're powerful when you say it like that, but it's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, because every business is going to be a technology business in the same way it'll be a media business as well, right? One of the reasons why Five Values is so committed to producing stories and amplifying voices of people in the industry is we know that to do that, for people to know who you are, you need to be doing those types of things, right?
Yeah.
And to be involved in technology, you need to be involved in that as well, right? So I think that's an amazing stat as well. 30 times to touch an IBM machine is pretty impressive, right? Because I think it reminds me of the Apple stat. When people said how many times you touch your phone in a day, and it's something ridiculous, like 500 times or something like that.
That's it.
But it's more impressive because it will be a plethora of different devices and things that you'll use that IBM has been involved with, which is staggering.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is, you've touched your Apple, you've touched your Microsoft, but there's all of this stuff under the hood that's happening in the background, and it shapes our world.
Yeah.
That's what I like to kind of get into people's heads is be part of this, because this is shaping the world. This is the future, and it's happening now. And I mean, this whole, we talked about the Mayflower earlier. Nothing on there. Okay, the experiments were new. All of the technology on there to run, for the AI captain to run, for the data, for the analytics, that all exists. We can do it today. It's not science fiction. It's here. We can do it. So yeah, if I could say anything to any, little kids out there is get involved. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
You can do amazing things.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap up the podcast. Actually, I think be involved in technology because it's shaping your world, not only your world, your children's world, and so on and so forth. Right, Vicky, it's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, I've got some quick fire questions for you, just a few. Okay. I want to know your thoughts on them. What would be the single most important piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Oh yeah. You're doing fine.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice. Fine. I didn't think you'd say that, but that's lovely.
Yeah. And if I was to, because I think we all do that. We all doubt ourselves and we all question whether you're doing the right thing or not, and mostly you are.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thoughts on the metaverse? Good thing, bad thing?
Yeah, I might pass on
That's
that.
Okay. I think that says everything.
The jury might still be out on that.
Yeah, no problem. Last one. Who's your biggest inspiration in your professional career and why?
Oh, I always find this a really difficult one because so there's a piece of it which is always my dad. But there's also a piece of it which is you have all these big names and these big faces and these big people who are out there, but the people who always inspire me are, for example, like these Pro Mare guys who just went, we should do something different. Let's go do something different. Let's go find a way to do that. And so the real inspirations for me are actually all of those people who are out there just thinking slightly differently and trying to do something slightly different and trying to change the world for the better and trying to get to tech for good and trying to deliver good technology and just really thinking every day, how do I make this work for the world? Those are the people that inspire me the most. And it's not always the big names. It's the guy in the office 3 doors over who's been sitting there for hours just trying to work out how if I code this like this, I could do something just amazing. How do I do that? So
yeah, that's lovely. And do you know what, that you find that sometimes in the tech world, in the open source world, you think about open source technology, right? And the premise of it, people that are really truly selfless. And I think, it's quite it's quite humbling, actually, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Vicky, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on to the 5V podcast. You've been excellent. I've really enjoyed it. Spoken passionately about a number of subjects. Been really interesting to know exactly what IBM's been up to and will continue to do in the future. So thank you for coming on to the show.
And thank you very much for having me. It's been really fun. And I can't wait to see the whole series. It's going to be great.
Vicky, where can we find out more about IBM? I assume on the internet.
Yeah, so you can find us at www.ibm.com. Yeah, but you also find if you go look for This Is IBM, and you will find all of the stories that we have around things like Wimbledon and plastic projects, removing plastic from the oceans, and there's a whole raft of really great inspirational stories there that talk more about what we actually do. You can always follow me on @VBunyard, although I will admit I've been a little bit quiet over the summer.
You've opened up the floodgates now, Vicky.
Yeah. But for sure, This Is IBM is a really good place to start, because then you see those inspirational projects and you see what we do out in the world, and then you'll start to see where those 30 connections a day come from. It's cool.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Vicky.